Out of my latter years, be no question of a miracle in the proper sense of the word. It is the goal of every activity of the intellect to convert a miracle into something which it has grasped. If in this case the miracle permits itself to be converted, our admiration for the mind of Newton becomes only the greater thereby. Galileo's ingenious interpretation of the simplest facts of experience had established the proposition, a body upon which no external force is at work permanently maintains its original velocity and direction. If it alters its velocity or the direction of its movement, the change must be referred to an external cause. To utilize this knowledge quantitatively, the conceptions velocity and rate of change of velocity, that is acceleration in the case of any given motion of a body, conceived as dimensionless material point, must first be interpreted with mathematical exactness. The task led Newton to invent the basis of differential and integral calculus. This in itself was a creative achievement of the first order. But for Newton as a physicist, it was simply the invention of a new kind of conceptual language which he needed in order to formulate the general laws of motion. For a given body, he had now to put forward the hypothesis that his precisely formulated acceleration both in magnitude and direction was proportional to the force directed upon it. The coefficient of proportionality, which characterizes the body with reference to its power of acceleration, completely describes the dimensionless body with reference to its mechanical quality. Thus was discovered the fundamental conception of mass. All the foregoing might be described too in the extremely modest manner of speaking as an exact formulation of something the essence of which had already been recognized by Galileo. But it by no means succeeded in solving the main problem. In other words, the law of motion yields the movement of a body only when the direction and magnitude of the force exerted upon it are known for all times. Thus, the problem reduced itself to another problem: how to find out the operative forces. To a mind any less bold than Newton's, it must have seemed hopeless, considering the immeasurable multifarity of the effects which the bodies of a universe seem to produce upon each other. Moreover, the bodies whose motions we perceive are by no means dimensionless points, that is to say, perceptible as material points. How was Newton to deal with such chaos? If we push a cart moving without friction on an horizontal plane, it follows that the force we exert upon it is given directly. That is the ideal case from which the law of motion is derived. That we are not here dealing with the dimensionless point appears essential. How does it stand then with a falling body in space? A freely falling body behaves almost as simply as the dimensionless point if one regards its movement as a wall. It is accelerated downwards. The acceleration, according to Galileo, is independent of its nature and its velocity. The heart, of course, must be decisive for the existence of this acceleration. It seemed then that the heart, by its mere presence, exerted a force upon the body. The heart consists of many parts. The idea seemed inevitable that each of these parts affects the falling body, and that all these effects are combined. There seems then be a force which bodies by their very presence exert upon each other through space. These forces seem to be independent of velocities, dependent only upon the relative position and quantitative property of the various bodies exerting them. This quantitative property might be conditioned by its mass, for the mass seems to characterize the body from the mechanical point of view. This strange effect of things at a distance may be called gravitation. Now, to gain precise knowledge of this effect, one has only to find out how strong is the force exerted upon each other by two bodies of given mass from a given distance. As for their direction, it will probably be no other than the line connecting them. Finally, then, what remains unknown is only the dependence of this force upon the distance between the two bodies. But this one can't know a priori. Here only experience could be of use. Such experience, however, was available to Newton. The acceleration of the moon was known from its orbit and could be compared with the acceleration of the freely falling body on the surface of the earth. Furthermore, the movements of the planets about the sun had been determined by Kepler with great exactness and comprehended in simple empirical laws. So it was possible to ascertain how the effects of gravitation coming from the earth and those coming from the sun depended on the factor of distance. Newton found that everything was explainable by a force which was inversely proportional to the square of the distance, and with that the goal was reached. The science of celestial mechanics was born, confirmed 1,000 times over by Newton himself and those who came after him. But how about the rest of physics? Gravitation and the law of motion could not explain everything. What determined the equilibrium of the parts of a solid body? How was light to be explained? How electrical phenomena? By introducing material points and forces of various kinds acting at a distance, everything seemed in a fair way to be derivable from the law of motion. That hope has not been fulfilled, and no one any longer believes in the solution of all our problems on this basis. Nevertheless, the thinking of physicists today is conditioned to a high degree by Newton's fundamental conceptions. It has so far not been possible to substitute for the Newtonian unified conception of the universe a similarly unified comprehensive conception. But what we have gained up till now would have been impossible without Newton's clear system. From observation of the stars have chiefly come the intellectual tools indispensable to the development of modern technique. For the abuse of the latter in our time, creative intellects like Newton's are little responsible as the stars themselves, contemplating which their thoughts took wing. It is necessary to say this became in our time esteem for intellectual values for their own sake is no longer so lively as it was in the centuries of the intellectual Renaissance. Jonas Kepler. In Kepler's letters, we find ourselves confronted with a sensitive personality, passionately devoted to the quest for deeper insight into the character of natural processes. A man who reached the exalted goal he set himself in spite of all internal and external difficulties. Kepler's life was devoted to the solution of dual problems. The sun and the planet changed their apparent position with reference to their background of fixed stars in a complex manner open to immediate observation. In other words, all the observation and records compiled with such care dealt not actually with the movements of the planets in space, but with temporal shifts undergone by the direction Earth planet in the course of time. Once Copernicus had convinced the small group capable of grasping it that in this process the sun must be regarded as being at the rest, with the planets, including the Earth, revolving about the sun. The first great problem proved to be this to determine the true motions of the planets, including the Earth, as they might be visible to an observer on the nearest fixed star, who was equipped with a perfect stereoscopic double telescope. This was Kepler's first great problem. The second problem was embodied in this question: what are the mathematical laws under which these motions proceed? It is plain that the solution of the second problem, if at all within reach of the human mind, was predicated on the solution of the first before a theory explaining a certain process can be tested. That process must first be known. Kepler's solution of the first problem is based on a truly inspired notion that made possible the determination of the true orbit of the Earth. To construct that orbit as a second fixed point in planetary space, in addition to the Sun, is required. When such a second point is available, it and the Sun may both be used as points of reference for angular measurements, and the Earth's true orbit can be determined by the same methods of triangulation that customarily serve in surveying and cartography. But where was such a second fixed point to be found, since all visible objects except the sun themselves execute motions that are not known in detail? This was Kepler's answer. The apparent motions of the planet Mars are known with great accuracy, including the time of its revolution about the sun, the Martian year. It is probable that at the end of each Martian year, Mars is at the same spot in planetary space. If we limit ourselves for the time being to these points in time, then the planet Mars represents for them a fixed point in planetary space, a point that may be used in triangulation. Employing this principle, Kepler first of all determined the true motion of the Earth in planetary space. Since the Earth itself may be used as a point for triangulation at any time, he was also able to determine the true motions of the other planets from his observations. This is how Kepler gained the basis for formulating the three fundamental laws with which his name will remain associated for all time to come. Today, after the fact, no one can fully appreciate how much ingenuity, how much hard and tireless work was required to discover these laws and ascertain them with such precision. The reader ought to know this as he learns from the letters under what hardships Kepler accomplished this gigantic work. He refused to be paralyzed or discouraged either by poverty or by the lack of comprehension among those of his contemporaries who had the power to shape his life and work. Yet he was dealing with a subject that offered immediate danger to him who professed the truth. But Kepler was one of the few who are simply incapable of doing anything but stand up openly for their conviction in every field. At the same time, he was not one who took undiluted pleasure in personal controversy, as was plainly the case with Galileo, whose unspirited barbs delight the informed reader even today. Kepler was a devout Protestant, but he made no secret of the fact that he did not approve all decision by the Church. He was accordingly regarded as a kind of moderate heretic and treated as such. This brings me to the inner difficulties. Kepler had to overcome difficulties at which I have already hinted. They are not readily perceived as the outward difficulties. Kepler's life work was possible only once he succeeded in freeing himself to a great extent of the intellectual traditions into which he was born. This meant not merely the religion's tradition based on the authority of the Church, but general concepts on the nature and limitations of action within the universe and the human sphere, as well as notions of the relative importance of thought and experience in science. He had to write him. نعم.